Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome SpaceCom Executive Director Ryan Brown.
I was worried I was going to trip, so far so good. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this year's SpaceCom Space Congress. We are pumped that you're here with us today, people who represent some of the most innovative and forward-thinking companies in the commercial space industry. The theme of our conference is off-planet for the planet. And in today's rapidly evolving landscape, the commercial space industry is poised for tremendous growth and innovation. But for us, it's important to remember why we go to space, and then just as important, to tell that story. Over the next 2 days, we'll be exploring the latest developments, trends, and innovations in the commercial space sector. We'll hear from experts in a wide range of fields, including on-planet applications, off-planet commercialization, space exploration, and commercial infrastructure. This conference is an opportunity to share ideas, network with colleagues, and collaborate on new projects and initiatives. It's a chance to explore the cutting-edge technologies and business models that are driving the commercial space industry forward, and to identify new opportunities for growth and innovation. I encourage you to make the most of your time here, to engage in meaningful conversations, and to leave this conference with new ideas, new connections, and new inspiration for the future of commercial space. Thank you for joining us this week, and together, let's make this the best SpaceCom Space Congress yet. With that, I'd like to introduce NASA's Susie Cunningham to sing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
I'm supposed to do a song and dance while we bring the chairs up for Bob and Alicia. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Alicia Brown and Bob Cabana.
Well, good morning, everyone. You know, when Susie Cunningham asked me to come and give the keynote, I said, these guys aren't going to want to listen to some guy stand up here and orate for 30 minutes and read some speech or talk. And I thought it'd be much more fun to just have an interactive discussion, a fireside chat, if you will. And I thought it was awesome that Alicia said yes when I asked her. As you know, Alicia is the Associate Administrator for Legislative Affairs at NASA. And I think her perspective on this year ahead is going to be interesting for you to hear. Also, you know, we had an amazing year last year. And you look at all that we accomplished with James Webb, you know, I can go down the line, all the science missions that were launched, the DART mission, more importantly, Artemis 1 and its successful test flight of the Orion vehicle. Everything was absolutely amazing, right? And it was a challenging year. But when I look at this year, I think this year is going to be even more challenging for us. What we have to accomplish in order to set our course for the future and ensure that we are successful. And we'll come back and talk about some of this stuff. One of the things that I really want to do is give our Deputy Administrator, Pam Melroy, credit for our architecture. Pam drove this, and Jim Free and his team have done just an outstanding job laying out an objectives-based architecture for us to return to the moon and go on to Mars, laying out the requirements that we need in order to be successful to do that and identifying gaps. And they've just done a superb job. So getting all of this in place, getting the funding, setting our course forward to get ready for Artemis 2, sending a crew on a crewed test flight to the moon, and eventually that first landing is going to be absolutely amazing. So how are we going to do that? You know, this year NASA got $25.64 billion, right? And that was a 6% increase over last year, outstanding. But as we go ahead, I think we're going to have some challenges. And I know right now, Alicia, what are your thoughts dealing with the Hill? And I think Alicia's superb at this, but what do you see as our challenges as we move forward with our stakeholders?
Yeah, first, Bob, thanks for inviting me to join you today. It's rare that you and the administrator let me leave DC, so I'm very happy to be down in Florida. Luckily, the Congress is out of session this week, and we've got a really big launch coming up this weekend, so it's a really great time to be here in Florida. Yeah, you know, working with the Congress, first you have to remember the Congress is, 535 individuals. They don't necessarily think or speak with one voice. And also the entire House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. So we're constantly having to re-educate the Congress about what NASA's doing, what our commercial and international partners are doing, and why it's important to them. And luckily, NASA and I think the space industry in general largely enjoys, very bipartisan support from members across the aisle. Particularly, where we have NASA centers or big industry facilities, we have a lot of support. But we are having to constantly re-educate them and remind them, and the many, many things that they have facing them that they have to decide on, why space is important for them, why they need to focus on it, and why they need to invest in it. And it is going to be, I think, a tough couple years for us. It's no secret that the Republican Congress in the House, at least the Republican House of Representatives, has talked about their concern about how much the government is spending, what our debt looks like, and wanting to maybe rein that in a little bit and go back to a bit of fiscal austerity. They've spoken about potentially going back to holding NASA and federal government spending at FY22 levels, which is billions of dollars less than what Bob just talked about that we got for FY23. And I think we're concerned about how that affects human spaceflight and Artemis, but it's going to impact all of our programs. But in particular, right now we just had an amazing Artemis 1 launch. Everyone is, I think, we're looking forward to Artemis 2. It's super exciting. I think folks wish it wasn't going to be, a 2-year gap. We can't do anything about that or much about it now. Those decisions were made years ago based on budget decisions. But what we can do right now in this fiscal year is ensure that there's not a big gap between Artemis 3, our first landing, and Artemis 4, which is our first Gateway mission and our next landing on the moon. So we and hopefully our partners are going to spend a lot of time on the Hill, talking about why that's important, maybe in the context of what other international companies or countries are doing, like China, and why the Congress, needs to make those investments now in us so that we can ensure we've got a strong, steady cadence of lunar landings.
Absolutely. Boy, great summary there. When I went up to Washington, I had life kind of going pretty well down here at the Kennedy Space Center. I had an awesome team. Not that I don't have an awesome team now, But, life was pretty easy compared to being up on the hill. I always told folks at KSC, when the folks at headquarters ask for something, get it to them as quickly and as accurately as you can, because they don't get to see rocket launches out the window. They don't get to walk around and touch real flight hardware like Vice President Pence did. That didn't even get a laugh. You don't remember? But, one of the things that I really enjoyed doing is I didn't have meetings on Fridays, and I'd get out and just go talk to folks and allow them to share what they were working on. And it's so inspiring to get out and actually see the hardware. And you don't get to do that in Washington. You're dealing with OPM and OMB and the folks on the Hill. So it has definitely been a different aspect of how we do things. But I got to tell you, I thought Jim Bridenstine, having a congressman, was really good. Having a senator, Senator Nelson's absolutely awesome. I've learned so much watching him and how he deals with our stakeholders and gets things done. I think we got a really awesome team up on the 9th floor right now. And as Alicia said, it really helps to have that bipartisan support. And I know that all of you, many of you, take the opportunity to go up and talk to our stakeholders on the Hill, and that constant education is really important. I don't know. I think that pretty much. Anything else you want to add on that subject, or any thoughts you got?
I'll just say, I'm sure I'm preaching to the preachers. Your companies know how to talk to members of Congress, but what we found is that it's, you have to figure out what those individuals are interested in. And it's not always going to be human spaceflight or Artemis. So NASA does so many things. You guys do so many things. What is it that, Zoe Lofgren, our ranking member, is going to care about that's different from Brian Babin, who represents Johnson? And, we've been talking more about our earth science investments because, what's going on out west with wildfires is something a lot of members of Congress care about. So what we've been thinking about is really kind of bespoke government relations, really tailoring our message and figuring out what a certain individual member of Congress, what's going to get them excited about what NASA's doing, so that hopefully overall, it helps kind of all rise the tide for everyone, that our budget can get to where we need to be all across the board.
I have to share something else that I really enjoy about being up in Washington, is that, I've been kind of pretty much involved with human spaceflight for the last umpteen years between Johnson, Stennis, and KSC, and training at Marshall and other places. But now I get to represent all the centers, and not just all the centers, but all the mission directors. And my life prior to coming to NASA was as a test pilot. And the aero side of what we're doing is really important also. So I think the theme of this Congress, and I know it's space related, but off the planet for the planet. And what we do as far as innovation is concerned is really, really important. And when I look across at all the things that we're doing, I like to throw the arrow in there too. We've done an awful lot with the climate, and you can argue all you want, but it's getting warmer, and to understand that and to be able to deal with it is really important. And sustainable aviation. One of the things that I think is really cool is the aero portfolio at NASA also. One of the things that we got coming out is the sustainable flight demonstrator. And I'm sure many of you were on an airplane flying here, a lot of single aisle airplanes, and that's bread and butter for the United States. What we do is, in our export, our GNP, aviation is really important. And having a sustainable flight demonstrator as we go forward that is less costly to operate, greener for the environment. What we are looking at as we develop this and test it, if it can feed into the technology that we need, it's really important. And I think one of the cool things that we're doing on Sustainable Flight Demonstrator, we have learned a lot from commercial space, okay, and how NASA has done our partnerships with Space Act agreements. If you look back on commercial cargo, commercial crew with SpaceX, and with Boeing now on commercial crew, hope to get those guys flying here later this year on a crewed demonstration. It was NASA money, but it was also company money that went into that. And on the Sustainable Flight Demonstrator, there's NASA money, but there's a significant investment being made by Boeing in this airplane as we build it. Yeah. So, Alicia, you've seen commercial space, on your time working for Senator Nelson when you were on the Hill, and now at NASA. What are your thoughts on how we're doing with commercial space and regulations or anything that you can think of?
Yeah, so this is going to be an interesting year in DC for commercial space and kind of setting up the regulatory framework going forward. I think a lot of folks are aware that the moratorium on regulating human spaceflight expires at the end of this fiscal year, at the end of September. And that's a big thing that the Congress and the FAA are looking at how we're going to tackle for years to come that's going to have rippling impacts throughout the industry. And NASA, we're really looking at, we've got starting I think at Kennedy, we've really changed the way and how we're working with commercial companies, buying more services. So it's going to be really important to us as we become more to NASA, as we're looking at commercial LEO destinations or CLPS missions, to make sure that the regulatory framework is set up so that we have certainty, right? But that also we can ensure that those missions that are important to us can go forward. Going back to the theme of this conference, we were talking about the way here, sustainable flight demonstrator and commercial space flight. Those are big things that I think a lot of people can see and understand, but there is a bunch of stuff that we do that doesn't make the news because so much is coming out. We were talking about some of the technologies in Turkey. I don't know if you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, the finder that NASA developed this technology, and it's being used over in Turkey with that huge earthquake, and it's essentially a radar that looks through all the rubble and can see movement down below, all the things that make a human, heartbeat and so on. And they were actually using it to find people over in Turkey in the rubble, and that was NASA developed technology. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's incredible when we have those examples, or I think the ventilators that came out of JPL during COVID, that those are things that people really understand. And for me on the Hill, it really helps help members of Congress understand why these investments in research and development at NASA can have spinoffs that are going to benefit them and their constituents and people across the world.
Yeah, it's really important to have that tie, and especially when you can have personal stories, like finding people in a debris, saving their life with NASA-developed technology. And I think when all of you do go up to the Hill and share our story, it really helps to have those specific examples that tie back, especially if you can find, where it was developed within their district and so on. This commercial side of it, you mentioned something else. I got to go back real quick because when you were talking, you mentioned CLPS. And, obviously we got this 2-year gap that you mentioned between Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 as we tear down the Orion capsule, get the black boxes out of it, test them, get them installed into the Artemis 2 Orion and check it all out. But that doesn't mean we're not going to the moon. We got CLPS missions launching to the moon this year, and that's out of the Science Mission Directorate. But here again, the total cost of that mission was not covered by NASA. The commercial companies had to go out and get their own support and payloads in order to break even or make a profit on these landers that they're developing and buy the rockets to launch them. But, we got commercial vehicles that are actually going to be landing on the moon. And I think that's pretty amazing. So one of the things that I point out is we go back to the moon now. We're not doing it like we did during Apollo. It's not just a government program on a 2 or 3 day camping trip with a bunch of white male test pilots. We're going in a sustainable way. We're going in partnership with our international partners, our commercial partners. Everybody has a role to play as we go back to the moon, and it's going to benefit all of us. And oftentimes when I get asked what was one of the biggest contributions of the space shuttle to America's space program, and if you look at that first class of NASA astronauts in 1978, the shuttle astronauts, the shuttle brought diversity to America's space program. There were men, women, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, and the shuttle accommodated from the 5th percentile female to the 95th percentile male. We don't quite get there, I don't think, with the vehicles that we got now, but we're dang close. And if I look at who's going back to the moon, we're doing this. Everybody is going to be able to see themselves. Commercial companies, our international partners, but everybody that lives on planet Earth is going to be able to see somebody that looks like them eventually as we go back to the moon and onto Mars. And I think that's the way it should be. When we explore beyond our home planet, as we establish this presence in our solar system beyond planet Earth, we do it together, not alone. And who was it? I think Senator Nelson, somebody brought up, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go in a sustainable way, in an enduring way, do it together. And I think that's what we're doing. We're doing it in an enduring way.
Bob, a lot of these changes, in how NASA does business, I really see as happening, Kennedy Space Center kind of leading the way from when you were in charge there. It really, after Space Shuttle retired, you guys did a ton of things at the center to make sure that commercial companies, I just wonder as you look, at the year ahead at KSC, all the different kind of commercial launches going on, how do you feel? Is this what you envisioned?
Yes. I take great pride, but we had an awesome team. We still have an awesome team. Kennedy Space Center is just doing a tremendous job. When I look at all that's going on in the Space Coast, and it's not just KSC, the partnership that we have working with the 45th Space Wing, with the Space Force and with the FAA, working together to enable all of this. I think Wayne Monteith might be in the office. I got to give Wayne a lot of credit for his time as the commander of the 45th Space Wing, how we work together to help make it more of a commercial-friendly environment, working with the FAA to reduce regulations. I think they had like 60 launches last year off the Cape, and we're looking for 100 this year. I mean, that is phenomenal. That's absolutely amazing. So when I look at what we accomplished, I take great pride in it. It's pretty awesome. When we first got going, I said, oftentimes you can see so clearly what you want to make happen. And it was like so hard trying to get all the agreements in place and pull people along to actually do it. And I was telling somebody, I can't believe we, couldn't have done it faster. And they said, for the government, I can't believe you did it as fast as you did. And there's some truth to that. I envy my friends in commercial space, but that agility and be able to do things quickly. If I look at where NASA was and where commercial space was, 10 years ago, and I look at where we are today, I think NASA has gotten more like commercial space, and I think there's some rigor that has gotten into commercial space that was needed also in learning from NASA's processes and mistakes that we've had in the past. So we're getting toward a middle ground that I think works well for both sides. But you were touring the Cape yesterday with the administrator, weren't you? What'd you think?
We had an awesome day. I mean, first we got to go see the heat shield that just came back from Artemis 1, which was just incredible to see, a piece of a space vehicle that had gone that far into space and come back. It made me really, really excited. Hopefully we'll still be around for Artemis 2, because it's just going to be incredible to see that mission. But yeah, I mean, the Cape has transformed so much, and it's continuously transforming. We went over to relativity space, they're doing 3D printed rockets out on the Air Force side or the Space Force side. And just, to see what they've done with that old Titan pad and the new technologies that they've infused in is just so cool to see. And then went to ULA, which of course has been around for a long time, but got to see their new Vulcan rocket, and we're looking forward to that potentially being one of the first CLPS missions that goes back to the moon. So how exciting is that going to be to have a new rocket with a payload that's landing on the moon? Between them or Intuitive Machines could be the first one, back on the moon for the first time we've been back for 55 years. And just, we go to the headquarters building, go to see your old office and look out at all the pads, and there's stuff going up everywhere. It's incredible. And I did work for Senator Nelson at the time when we were going through this transition, and I recall you and he and General Monteith and FAA really having to do a lot of work behind the scenes to make that work that I think people probably don't realize. And I know that work is still going on. It makes me wonder, as we are continuing to grow and do business in low Earth orbit and beyond, what new agencies are we going to start working with if we're, developing pharmaceuticals, and, is that going to bring in FDA, and kind of what lessons we might apply to people who don't know anything about space, who we're going to have to start working with.
Absolutely, and the science on the International Space Station, I mean, it's critical, it's really important. It's not just learning about how to live and work in space, but there are technologies coming off it. The protein crystal growth, JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, has done tremendous work with protein crystal growth and how it can be adapted, and learn more about, engineering drugs to combat various illnesses and stuff. So commercialization of space, I think, is going to be really important. We've extended ISS to 2030, but our goal is to have, as everybody knows, commercial LEO destinations, and much more mini space stations, if you will, where NASA is one of many customers. We're not paying for this whole thing, that we can still send folks up there, do science, whatever's required in low Earth orbit. But establishing these commercial LEO destinations, I think, is going to be a huge challenge. And of course, everybody knows we've been working with Axiom on private astronaut missions to kind of figure out how are we going to work together with commercial partners on the International Space Station, and then transition all the labs and the science that we're doing on ISS to these new commercial LEO destinations as they get developed. I think that's going to be a huge challenge as we move forward, but I think a very important one.
Yeah. Having lived through, at least being in the Senate during the retirement of shuttle and before commercial crew and cargo were really up and running, seeing that gap of, in human spaceflight was something that I know that we really don't want to see again, something you and Pam and the administrator talk about all the time. And I want to go back to something I mentioned earlier, because you'll hear us talking more and more about this. We are going to be a customer on these commercial LEO destinations. We really need to make sure that they have the regulatory process to get approved to fly. And that's something that the Congress, if you've heard them talk about the Article 6 from the Outer Space Treaty, or on-orbit supervision, that's something that the Congress hasn't really thought about. And I think that the human spaceflight moratorium is a really good time for us to start talking about it within this year, that we really need these processes in place so that the commercial companies have a regulatory pathway to actually go fly, and so that, again, that we can continue to do our important work in low Earth orbit.
Well, even now, if you look at the commercial crew program, the FAA licenses the launch. The FAA's job is to protect the safety of humans here on Earth. They don't protect the crew on orbit, all right? There is currently no regulations for spacecraft in space for commercial companies. Now, from a NASA point of view, we have worked with SpaceX and Boeing to ensure that our human ratings requirements have been incorporated into these vehicles. And we have processes that we have put in place with SpaceX on how we operate in order to get to where we are safe as we put our astronauts on these commercially licensed launches of crews to the International Space Station, of which we have one coming up. I don't know if you've read in the paper or not, but we're going to be launching at 01:45 on Monday morning with Crew 6, the seventh flight of a crewed vehicle by SpaceX to the International Space Station early Monday morning. We need to ensure that we do this safely. And when we fly these private astronaut missions, if you look at how SpaceX has flown, the Inspiration mission or a PAM mission to the International Space Station, even though those are not NASA astronauts, even though we don't regulate how they operate in space, we only are concerned with them on the time that they are docked with the International Space Station, the agreements that we have in place to ensure that they're safe on the space station and that we're operating together well in that environment. When they're off on their own, NASA doesn't have anything to do with that. But if you look at how SpaceX operates those missions, they follow the same procedures that they put in place, that NASA has helped them put in place for our missions. They also use those procedures and processes when they fly their commercial missions. So I think we're laying the groundwork on what needs to get done, and as we license eventually these commercial LEO destinations, these space stations, we'll see what comes out from a regulatory point of view, but there's a lot of work that's going to need to get done between now and then.
I know you and the administrator and deputy administrator have spent a lot of time thinking about safety on station for these private astronaut missions. And it's, we put some rules in place that I think make us feel more comfortable about how the missions are being executed. But as we do look to a purely commercial platform, what kind of things do you want to see from these companies to make you feel comfortable with saying we can fly our astronauts and go live there for some time?
So through the commercial LEO destinations, we've made known what our requirements are for our humans that fly on them. And we would expect them to meet our human rating requirements for the spacecraft that they have. I think, before we launch anybody to any of these spacecraft, just as when we fly NASA missions on commercial aircraft for science or whatever, we make sure that those aircraft are operated in a safe manner, that they've got all the right procedures in place, are meeting all the FAA regulations and so on. We'll make the same kind of evaluation as we launch crews to these commercial LEO destinations, just as we have done with commercial crew. So we'll be very involved before we put a NASA astronaut into any of these vehicles. And it's something, I will share with all of you. We recently had NASA's Week of Remembrance, and all of us, we need to learn from the past. When I look at, how those accidents of Challenger and Columbia, even Apollo 1, how they came to be, what we really need to do is make sure that we create an environment where everyone feels free to speak up and be heard when they have a concern. And so I challenge all of you that are in leadership positions in your companies or where you work, that when you're having a meeting, you ensure that it's an environment that is inclusive, where people are free to air their concerns, that they're actually listened to. There's a difference between hearing and listening, that they're listened to and acted upon. And that doesn't mean that you got to go do what the person said, but that there's logic for why you're doing what you're doing. I don't want to see us ever have to have another Columbia accident. And as we go forward in this commercial environment, I think it's even more important that we are paying attention to all the details.
Yeah.
So we got a couple minutes left. I've been asking all the questions. What questions you got for me, Alicia?
Well, we were talking about the private astronaut missions and just all the different kinds of people who are going to space these days. It's changed a lot from Apollo and from the early shuttle missions. What has you excited? How do you think it's going to change the world to see, all these different kinds of people flying in space?
I'll tell you, I probably get the most excited. Well, I was really excited watching Artemis 1 launch. That was awesome.
Yeah.
At T-minus 10 minutes when we came out of the hold, I took the administrator and deputy administrator off console, and we went up on the roof of the LCC to watch that, and that was just an amazing launch. But, when I talk to school children, and I talk about space and share slides of what we're doing, and they get to see these videos, and they get to see, the excitement in their eyes. This is our future. And to see that enthusiasm in students that want to be a part of this. We make all the science fiction stuff, we just make it look so easy, and you don't appreciate the challenge. But it still motivates. It is something that binds us together. It gives us a cause to work together. It gives us a vision of the future that can be better than what we have. And I think that inspiration, it just means a lot to me.
Yeah, I have a 4-year-old son, and at his school they're celebrating Black History Month or Women's History Month, and I always see the picture that they've drawn of Mae Jemison or another astronaut hero. It's just, we're going to have so many different kinds of people flying as part of Artemis or part of these commercial or PAM missions, and just, how many more people are we going to be able to inspire by having more people look up at space and say, hey, someone like me is flying, I can do that too. So it's just, it's such, you guys all know, we're preaching to the preachers here. It's such an exciting time to be part of the space program or part of the commercial space industry. And they're going to have to drag me out when it's time for me to go.
I'm with you. We were talking to some folks out in the hall, and as I was walking back, I said, Alicia, this is why I can't retire. I enjoy this too much. It's just being a part of this.
That and the administrator won't let him retire.
That's very true. Thank you so much for coming and participating in the conference. I think one of the best benefits of these conferences is the interaction, not so much at talks like this, but it's out getting a cup of coffee at the breaks and the people that you build relationships with. That's what this is all about. It's about building relationships, working together as we move forward. As Alicia said, I cannot think of a more exciting or challenging time in not just our nation's space program, but in our world space program, in space exploration, than what we're doing right now. NASA's developing like 4 different commercial vehicles all at the same time. It's just, there's so much going on, and it's such a challenge, but it's so much fun to be a part of it. All right, well, once again, any last words you want to add?
No, thank you for having us. Look forward to hopefully seeing you all in DC. Please feel free to reach out if you ever need help or assistance navigating NASA. We're here to help.
Absolutely. So you guys just keep doing a great job educating our stakeholders, working together, building those relationships, and more importantly, no matter what you do, be safe, stay healthy, and enjoy what we're doing, because I can't think of anything more rewarding than being part of this amazing team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alicia and Bob. Always a pleasure to welcome Bob back to our stage. He was our keynoter last year, and he had a lot to say this year, too, so always a pleasure to have him here. Moving on to our next fireside chat, we have a real casual set of keynotes this year. I'd like to welcome to the stage Sandra Irwin from Space News and Richard Del Bello, Director of the Office of Space Commerce.
Good morning, everyone. How are you doing this morning? Welcome to Orlando.
So thanks for joining this session with Richard Del Bello, the Director of the Office of Space Commerce. Some of you may work with him regularly, maybe others don't, but he's somebody that you have to know because of the role that the Office of Space Commerce plays in different aspects of space, the space industry, the space business. And he's been on the job less than a year, so
Practically a veteran.
Yeah. Yeah, he was appointed in May of last year. He's been really busy with lots of different initiatives. So I was going to maybe ask Richard to give us just a quick overview. I know you wear multiple hats within OSC, so tell us about the areas that you're focusing on and what are your major priorities right now?
Thank you very much. I think the Office of Space Commerce is a fascinating little office within NOAA, within the Department of Commerce. We have three principal responsibilities. In the last administration, Space Policy Directive 3 said that space tracking for civil objects should transition from the responsibility for that should transition from the Defense Department to the Commerce Department. So our office, the biggest piece of our job today is our office is responsible for that transition, and we can talk about that maybe a little bit more. The second piece is we're a regulator, so we currently regulate the Earth remote sensing industry. There's a dialogue ongoing within the Space Council about, I just heard Bob Cabana's remarks, and he made reference to the fact that there aren't clear regulatory rules for safety for human spaceflight. So one of the intriguing topics that the Space Council is working on is what is the future of regulation? Who in the U.S. government is a regulator or when are regulations needed? So that dialogue is ongoing, and we can hopefully talk about that a little bit more too. And then finally, but also very importantly, we have for over 30 years been an advocate for the commercial space industry. And that advocacy sometimes is domestic and working on the side of industry to try to reduce barriers, to reduce regulations. Sometimes that advocacy is international, where we're trying to work with one of our domestic partners on a contract or on a business venture that they're trying to do where there's some issues. So it is a really dynamic portfolio, and it seems to be growing more interesting every day.
So Richard, let's dig into this regulatory issue, because a lot of this audience here, they're from different sectors of the industry, new space companies. They face a lot of regulatory uncertainty. They want to know who's going to be responsible for what regulations. And right now there's a big conversation happening in the administration about that in the National Space Council. We heard from the FCC that they came in with some proposals. Are you talking to the FCC? And when can we expect to see some clarity on this regulatory environment? And can you give us some details on that?
Sure. The issue, and not to get too wonky right at the beginning, but we signed the Outer Space Treaty in 1967. One of the clauses of that treaty says that the private sector entities of countries will be supervised by those countries. So the actual law holds the country responsible and asks the country to be responsible for all of their citizens. So from that, we get a global commitment to some form of regulation, and different countries have chosen different forms. In the United States, we've sort of divided the responsibility, so the FCC historically way before the space age, the FCC was doing regulation of spectrum. So in the space age, the FCC started doing satellite regulation. Department of Transportation, of course, has many hats. Within DOT is the FAA, which of course does all of aviation, but also does launch and return to the Earth. Again, as Bob Cabana just mentioned, there are some kind of gaps in the way we do regulation today. So if, for example, we have the authority to regulate Earth imaging, but the lawyers have determined that we don't have the authority to regulate companies that are doing RF imaging. And so for the moment, there isn't a clear regulatory structure for those things. So, and as we move out and do more things, as we have commercial habitats in space, as we more tourism in space, as we do rovers on the moon, mining, different sorts of sensing of the Earth and of the other planetary bodies, those things may not come under anyone's jurisdiction. So what the White House has ongoing today, a broad review of that, and I think that I would say soon, in answer to when. I mean, I think they're pretty close to wrapping it up. And so that will devolve to, okay, in the future, who owns what pots of regulatory?
So in your conversations with industry, what do you think needs to happen? You know, if it was, you know, if you were king for a day, I mean, how would you structure this regulatory environment? And, you know, what steps do you think, because the industry right now faces, you know, economic demands and regulations, regulatory issues sometimes slow their growth. So what are some questions that you're getting from the industry, and what would you suggest maybe could be done?
Obviously, I think if you're an entrepreneur and you're just starting a company, the last thing you want to spend money and time on is unnecessary regulation. So I think the first thing we do hear from industry is be careful what you do with regulation. This isn't, by the way, this isn't entirely our decision, of course. The regulation is typically something where the administration will have a proposal, but generally regulations get written in the US Congress. So this is a dialogue that goes beyond just what we think ought to happen. So there will be a broader dialogue with Congress on this, and Congress will make decisions. So ultimately, they play a key role in all of this. But I think the thing that everyone is attuned to, I mean, the phrase you hear often is light touch regulation. And so trying to understand what is necessary to ensure safety or to ensure our international obligations, but what is the minimum necessary so that we're not unduly burdening, particularly young companies that don't have the resources to go out and hire a bunch of law firms and a bunch of lobbyists and all of that. So we are mindful of that. So I think that's the thing I hear the most, which is, you know, be careful, do only what you must.
Yeah. One of our audience members asked a question about activities on the moon. In the absence of ownership laws, so to speak, about, you know, who owns what on the moon or those regulatory issues. What are your thoughts about the regulation of lunar commerce? That's a question from the audience. What thoughts do you have on that?
Boy, again, these are deep questions because it's another wonky answer. This goes all the way back to the international treaties that govern how space should be governed. The original agreements basically had an idea that you can't appropriate space. So you can't just go claim a whole section of the moon and say, you know, this is the property of XYZ Corporation. But as we saw more recently in the Artemis Accords, the principles in the Artemis Accords, which are getting, I think, very, very broad support from the international community, do allow for the use of resources. So we don't really know how that's going to turn out as we fast forward. I mean, it seems kind of far-fetched and crazy today, but a decade from now, 2 decades from now, it's going to be a reality. And so the question is, well, what does use but not appropriation mean? And so if you look at geostationary orbit, for example, we've been using geostationary orbit since the 1960s, and the rules that have grown up there, they don't grant ownership to companies who are using the orbital slots, but they do grant a right of use. And so I think you might have something like that develop where companies have a right of use which allows them to build a business, but not an ownership which would allow them to exclude everyone permanently. And obviously there's a lot of vagueness in that statement, but I think these are issues that we'll have to get to. These will be solved when they come at us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you speak with a lot of your peers in other nations, in allies and partners. Some of them are also trying to grow their space industries, dealing with some of these same questions. I know recently you had a meeting with the French organization, space organization. You've had meetings with other countries. What do you guys talk about? I mean, what are some of their concerns, and do they have the same concerns as the U.S. industry? And what are maybe some interesting takeaways that you've come with from these meetings?
Well, I think sort of overall, I think that many people in the international community are simply amazed by the depth, breadth, and energy of the U.S. commercial industry. And they're looking at it really with the same sort of amazement that they looked at the sort of Silicon Valley when it first blew up. And I think that so there is a really interest in how can we replicate that, and we've heard that from a lot of different countries. And this has resulted in one of the things we did in France is, you know, there are frequently government-to-government dialogues as the governments get together to talk about issues, whether national security or commerce or trade or export control. So there are these routine dialogues. So one of the things we've tried to do recently is graft on a commercial component of these government dialogues. So we actually, if there's, for example, in France, when there was a day scheduled where we were going to comprehensively discuss all of our space issues, from regulation to national security to trade, and we said, well, why don't we do something with the commercial sector the day before? Mm-hmm. So we had a bunch of companies from the US, a bunch of companies from France got together, free and open dialogue, and then we captured the issues from that day and then presented those issues in the government-to-government meetings so that the government was hearing directly from the commercial sector rather than just meeting in their own little bubble. Mm-hmm. So I think going forward, we're going to try to do that again in Japan in March, and then hopefully that'll become a regular part of the way we have these international discussions. Because we're also mindful that US companies are looking internationally for partners, for resources, for financing. And so this is a big, complicated global world right now, and we have to have tools that go beyond the tools that we were using previously.
To that point, and that was another question from the audience, how do we engage with Russia and China at this point? I mean, they have to, at some point, they have to be part of the conversation, and how do we move forward?
There are obviously very, very different questions. Russia and China, obviously Russia is a space station partner, remains a space station partner. We started our relationship with Russia during some pretty difficult times, and we've maintained it over the years. I mean, obviously the aggression in Ukraine is completely illegal and unacceptable, and so I think that the Russian dialogue is probably going to be completely stopped until there's a resolution there. China is much more, in some ways, much more complicated, I think. In the world that I spend most of my time in the SSA world, the space tracking world, all countries except China are freely sharing information. And so, the US, through the 18th Space Force, has a tool called spacetrack.org, where pretty much anybody can get an account, operators have different level of accounts, but they can share their data in real time. So it's a platform that ensures that, because tracking only gets you so far, and that's a longer discussion, but having operator information, their own location information, their maneuver information, these are critical to doing real clear SSA. And so when we have something like China, where they're doing a lot of space activity, including human space activity, but they're not participating in the international community, it's like trying to fly a big airplane into JFK without being on the air traffic control network. So it's a very dangerous thing that is going on. Right now we have only, really modest ways of communicating with China. It's gotten a little bit better over the past few years, but we're still exchanging data by email and other ways. It's totally not. We need the uninterrupted flow of data about where their assets are. And so we are open. We have been open to this dialogue, and so far they have not been. So hopefully that will change in the future, because we need them to play a constructive and active role in the international community of space tracking, space situational awareness.
Yeah, I mean, it's a topic that comes up every time we see one of these uncontrolled reentry situations, very dangerous. And of course, a segue into your role as in space traffic management, we heard yesterday from Lieutenant General Shaw, Deputy Commander of Space Command, talking about their role in spacetrack.org, and he said, everyone here is a member, it's free, and we provide that. But you have a mandate to transition to a civilian system by 2024. When are people going to be able to sign up for this civilian spacetrack.org, or whatever it's going to be called? Can you give us an update on that?
The name that we chose is TRAX.
Right.
So first, a little bit of clarity. The 18 Space Force is definitely not going away. So they're going to continue to do what they do. Their focus is going to be space domain awareness. Excuse me. Their focus is going to be space domain awareness. Our focus is going to be commercial SSA. With the proliferation of, with the proliferation of commercial constellations, I think the DoD is finding it very difficult to focus on their core mission while taking care of the commercial sector. So the logic behind SPD 3, Space Policy Directive 3, was that we need to free up the Defense Department to focus on what is most important to them. The Defense Department, of course, has international agreements with many countries, and I suspect they will maintain those also. Our focus will be commercial operations and civil operations. We're not, at least initially, there won't be any effort to force people to choose. For a while, we're going to run both systems side by side. Eventually, I think the DoD will start turning off services. We're shooting for initial operating capability by the third quarter 2024, with a FOC in 2025, and I suspect sometime after that, DoD would start stepping down the services that it supplies. Initially at IOC, we'll probably be doing a limited set of services to a beta set of customers, but at FOC obviously offering a full service. One of the big issues in Space Policy Directive 3 is it said, rather simply, that we should provide a basic service, but nowhere was it defined what is in a basic service. So we've put a lot of effort into trying to figure out doing that, how to do that. We, a few weeks ago, a month ago, went out with an RFI seeking information from both SSA providers and from satellite operators, And we listed a bunch of things, and we were very clear, you know, this one's in, we're offering it for free, this one's out, right? So we went through the list of about, I think, 16 or so of the top SSA tools, and described what we intend to give away for free and what we're not. And part of that is because we know there's an SSA industry out there. And so you have to be mindful when you're in the government and you're spending money. You walk into a marketplace, you immediately have an impact on that marketplace. And so part of our goal is to be at a minimum to minimize the amount of disruption we create in the marketplace. So on the other hand, we are being obligated to provide a service. So we're looking for comments from people who are either in the SSA industry or who are satellite operators or who are academicians or researchers who want to have a comment about, is our first cut, is it too big? Is it too small? Should we not do things? So hopefully, I think the responses are due on that, and I think next week sometime. So hopefully we'll get a lot of thoughtful commentary, and then we'll have an industry day and talk about where we are on that.
Okay, so as far as the space situational awareness sector of the industry, a lot of people want to know, where are the opportunities? Your office received a significant funding increase. Congress is very supportive of what you're doing.
They have been very kind this year. Hope they are kind next year, too.
Well, we'll see next week or in 2 weeks when we see the new budget. But by all accounts, it looks like they will continue to support this. Now they're seeing light at the end of the tunnel, 2024. What are the opportunities for the private sector as far as getting involved in providing data for your new system, for the track system? You've run a pilot program for geo intelligence, geo tracking. Of course, LEO is more problematic. You know, what are you going to do about the LEO part of the side of the house? And again, what are the opportunities that you see coming in the next couple of years?
Right. So we did do an all-commercial geo pilot. It's actually just wrapped up, I think, last week. And we'll move into a phase where we're analyzing the information that we got from the pilot. And we had a couple of very simple objectives. One was to do this whole pilot at geostationary orbit, right, which is a pretty, you know, I always say the difference between geo and low Earth orbit is like the difference between living in the country and living downtown in a major city, right? So your problems are exponentially more difficult in low Earth orbit than at geo. So we wanted to do a geo pilot for a couple of reasons. One is we wanted to do something completely without U.S. government data. So we did the whole pilot with just commercial data entirely. And again, we just wrapped it up. We're going through the analytical phase. I have every confidence that we will have met or exceeded the current level of capability. The same is not true for LEO. LEO is just much harder. There are many, many, many more active and debris objects in low Earth orbit. And tracking, there just aren't a lot of, we get most of our information from geo, from telescopes, and in LEO it's mostly from radars. And we have a couple of companies that are engaged actively in LEO, like LEO Labs has their own radars, but right now it's not the coverage or the resolution that we would need to do this with an all-commercial fashion. There are a lot of companies who do analytics, and I mean, they don't do their own observations, but they have, you know, their own magical software that takes all the information and turns it into information, and takes all the data and turns it into information. So it is a complicated industry right now. So we are looking at maybe doing a LEO pilot. We're not really sure what the scope of that is yet. We're actually talking to the industry about what would be most practical. But the goal is to actually demonstrate the commercial tools which are available. We also went out last year and we did a data buy where we bought data, LEO observation data, geo observation data, and for validation purposes. So we just bought a bunch of data just because it's not, SSA isn't so simple that you just take a picture of space and that magically gives you an answer. I mean, all sensors have some biases, and so you have to understand what people are offering you. So we did an initial round of data buys. I suspect in the future we'll probably do something like an IDIQ to have an ever fresh source of commercial data, but we're not there yet.
So one of the questions that came in, how should entrepreneurs look at this problem in terms of, should they be investing in debris removal? Is there going to be a market for that? Should they be investing in sensors and analytics? I mean, is there going to be opportunities? Because you will have free data that will be provided from the government, but then you also maybe want to use some private sector data. So is there going to be, do you foresee spending being allocated to those areas?
Those are all great and all complicated questions. Part of the reason for the RFI was to understand where the commercial sector intends to invest or whether they've already invested, because we don't want to step on that investment. We would like there to be an active industry. But operators have to understand that it's not just the United States. The EU has set up the EU SST, which is their own independent SSA entity. I suspect other countries will start to do so also. And the EU has said that capacity building, which is kind of their phrase for building their industry. So their capacity building is an objective of their system. And they didn't intend, and they told us rather bluntly that they didn't intend to buy US. That this was about building their own internal capability. So you're going to, so as people invest in this market, they have to understand that it's very dynamic. And today, regulatorily, I don't have any ability to mandate anyone to do anything. The way the 18th Space Force works is that it sends you a conjunction data message, and that message pretty much says, you should look at this because we think you're coming close to something. And operators can choose to look at it or they can choose to ignore it. So if one of the balances that we have is that there are no rules that mandate people to even have a space safety service like this. So if I try to impose, if I impose rules that are too onerous, people can simply go over to the EU. So it's a complicated dynamic that we're coming into right now.
I've heard you say something like, we did it with air traffic, now we can do it with space traffic. I mean, that sounds really great, but I mean, is that going to happen, do you think, in the foreseeable future? I mean, you roll out your new service in 24. At what point are we going to see a more efficient approach to traffic management? At what point is there going to be more assurances to the industry that space will be safer, that low Earth orbit will be more sustainable for operations?
I think this is a question where you have to have a historical, to answer this you have to have an historical point of view. We've been flying airplanes now for over 100 years. In the beginning and for the longest period of time, there was no air traffic control. There wasn't any need for air traffic control. I was reading, I think it was sometime in the 30s, late 30s, I think, some of the airlines got together to work on coordinating flights because it was getting a little busy. I think it was in Chicago or somewhere in the Midwest. And so that was the first beginning. It was sort of an informal thing. And I think we'll see the same, if you have to think about it in terms of decades. Where we are now is we don't have, the tools we have are not good enough, okay? We're pretty good at SSA. We're not nearly precise enough to say, I'm absolutely telling you if you don't maneuver, you're going to have a collision. We don't have that. We have the ability to estimate now. And obviously we need better tools. But there is today there is no body of law and regulation, and there shouldn't be, don't get me wrong, there shouldn't be because it's too early. But there isn't an equivalent body of law and regulation like we have in air travel, right? So the building airplanes, flying airplanes, all of that is regulated by the FAA, with thousands of clauses and lots of humans involved in the regulatory process. So will we get there? No, not in our lifetimes, not in your or my lifetime, no. But we are already on the way there. And I think one of the things we need to have is an open discussion of operator responsibility, particularly with younger operators. Like regulation, spaceflight safety may not be the first thing that younger operators worry about when they're building a system. They're more interested in defining a technology and building a marketplace. And it won't surprise you that not all operators are good at flying their spacecraft, in that some operators don't exactly know where they are, which I think we'd all agree is not a great thing. So we're on a journey. It's going to be measured in decades, not years. And eventually we'll march towards a more coherent regulatory structure, and we'll march towards a greater understanding of what operator responsibility means in each individual case.
Before we let you off the stage, the mandatory question, anything that keeps you up at night these days?
Yes, many things, but mostly it's the SSA program, and it's the looming deadlines of 2024 and 2025, which are very, very short timelines. When we got the responsibility from the White House in the last administration, there really wasn't any staff at the Department of Commerce, right? And they didn't have a budget. And nobody had defined the simplest things like, well, what is it that we're supposed to offer? So we've made some progress, and I think this year our focus has been engagement with industry in a more meaningful fashion. But we have a lot of work to do to get to IOC 24 and FOC 25. That keeps me up at night.
Yeah, understand. Well, thank you, Richard. Please join me in a round of applause. Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much, Sandra and Richard. We have all the confidence in the world, Richard. You're going to hit those deadlines, right? I'm in trouble, I think, now. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this morning. Just quick closing remarks. We have 2 full days following here, SpaceCom Space Congress. The breakout rooms are across the hall, 222 and 221. We hope you guys join us in those sessions. There's a lot of great content. There's tremendous speakers this year. We couldn't be happier with the folks that are joining us to share their innovative ideas and technologies with you. The exhibit hall is just out this way across the hall as well. We have the largest exhibit hall floor we've ever had at SpaceCom Space Congress. There are lots of technology solutions providers waiting to see you guys. So stop in there and say hello. They got lots of cool tchotchkes to hand out to you as well. So with that, I'm going to conclude this opening general session for SpaceCom Space Congress 2023. Thanks again for coming, and we'll see you out there.